Hi, my name is Courtney. I'm a licensed CPA and daycare owner, and this week I'm teaching you all about Schedule C. Let's jump in. This is what Form Schedule C looks like. As you can see at the very top, it says profit or loss from business. Underneath that, in parentheses, it says sole proprietorship. And that's because Form Schedule C is only used by sole proprietorships and by single member LLCs. To the right of that, you can see that this is the 2024 tax year version of the form. If you're completing a paper tax return, or if you're filling out this form by hand and mailing it in, it's important to make sure that you're using the correct year, the correct version of this form. If you're using online software to complete your tax return, then the software will take care of that for you. And so we're just going to be going over in this video the general information section of Form Schedule C. So that's everything above this line here that says income. All right. So on our first row here, it says name of proprietor. That's going to be your name. So you want to make sure that you input your first and last name, and it should match the first and last name that you file your individual tax return under. If you look above this line here, right in this print here, it says attached to Form 1040, 1040 SR, and then it lists some other forms after that. And that's because generally Schedule C is an attachment to your individual tax return. That means that you aren't generally going to be filing this form on its own. Rather, it gets attached to your regular individual tax return, which generally is going to be Form 1040. And so after you input your name, to the right of that, you want to input your social security number and this field here. And then moving on to line A, it says principal, business, or profession, including product or service. And then in parentheses, it says see instructions. I recommend that when you're completing Form Schedule C, that you have the instructions to Form Schedule C pulled up. That way you can reference them as you're completing the form in case you have any questions about what's being asked. But it's important to know that for line A, you want to give a brief description of what your business is. And so you can list that here. To the right of line A, on line B, it says enter code from instructions. And so there are a list of general business codes. And so from that list of codes, you want to select the one that most closely aligns to your business. So for most of us, that's going to be the business of, a daycare or family child care center or even a commercial care center. There are some codes that closely align with that. So you want to pick one of those and input it here. And then if you want, you could even just copy the description of that code here under where it says principal, business, or profession. So moving on to line C, it says business name. If no separate business name, leave blank. And so if you have an LLC for your business, right? So if you have a single member LLC for your business that you registered on your Secretary of State's website, you want to input that name here. If you have a DBA for your business, so maybe you don't have a single member LLC, but you have a DBA for your business, you could also enter that name here on line C. And then to the right of that, on line D, it says employee ID number or EIN. So an employee ID number is an EIN. Those are the same thing. EIN is just an abbreviation for employee ID number. But you want to input the EIN here on line D if you have one. If you don't have one, then you can just leave this field blank. On line E, it says business address. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You want to input the address of your business here. So if you have a family childcare, then generally this is going to be your address. And then on line F, it says accounting method. For most folks, you're going to want to check box 1, which is cash, because generally you're going to be under the cash method of accounting. There is an additional option here for the accrual method and another option that says other, and then it wants you to specify. For 99.9% of us, we're going to want to check the cash method here. On line G, it says, did you materially participate in the operation of this business during 2024? If no, see instructions for limits on losses. And so what this question is trying to get at is, are you actively participating in this business? If the answer is no, then, and you have a loss from the business, then there are some limits to how much of the losses that you can take. For the majority of us, the answer to this question is going to be yes. On line H here, if you started or acquired this business during 2024, check here. And so if 2024 was the first year that you owned or operated your daycare, then you want to check this box. If you started your daycare in a prior year, so before 2024, then just leave this line here blank. And then moving on to line I, did you make any payments in 2024 that would require you to file Forms 1099? And then you can check yes or no. And so what this question wants to know is, did you use any contractors in your business, either contractors who provided care or another service to you, or possibly even provided a product to you? So if the answer to that question is yes, then you're going to want to check yes here. If the answer to this question is no, because maybe you don't have any assistants, or maybe all of your assistants were full-fledged W-2 employees, then you can just check no here. And then the very last question in the general information section is line J, and it says, if yes, did you or will you file required Forms 1099? And so what question J is asking is, okay, if you answered yes to the question on line I, right? So are you required to complete or file Forms 1099? Question J is saying, are you going to? Have you or will you? And so this is kind of a got you question, but if the answer to the question on line I is yes, then generally the answer to the question on line J should be yes, right? If you're required to issue Forms 1099 to your contractors, then you should be issuing those. And that is really what question J is asking. It's saying, okay, well, if you had a filing requirement, did you meet that requirement? It's important to note that if the answer to the question on line I is yes, so you're required to, issue Form 1099, but then you answer no to question J, that is a pretty good way for you to get a notice from the IRS. So, right, if there's a mismatch here between these two questions, the IRS is going to see that and think, hey, looks like you should have reported income that you paid to someone on Form 1099, but you didn't. We're going to send you a notice about that. You want to avoid getting notices from the IRS because generally notices are going to come with interest, sometimes penalties, fines, things like that. So just important to know that about questions I and J. If you had a 1099 filing requirement, you want to make sure that you have fulfilled that requirement, and you want to indicate the correct answers to those questions here on these lines. And so that is pretty much the general information section. We'll talk about part 1, the income section, in the next video.